Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Human Libraries of Procurement. We call it Human Libraries of Procurement because it has three most important elements. The human element, because it's all about the human connect. The libraries element, because there are many wise people and knowledgeable people in procurement. And procurement, obviously, because we talk about procurement. One such human library of procurement is Alex Farr. Welcome accepting this invite. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing very well, thank you. I really appreciate the invite.
Right. So, Alex, if you would start by...
Yeah, I'm Alex Farr. I'm 49 next month, 2 young kids, live up in Scotland in the UK. Been up here since 2010. I've got quite an interesting career, I suppose, across procurement. I think if you don't mind me just cracking on, I'll explain a little bit about why and what sort of brought me to procurement. But basically, procurement wasn't even a word for me. Like, I started my career back in '99, I think it was.
Yes.
And yeah, procurement, not in my vocabulary. Never really understood what it was. In fact, the first time I ever heard the word procurement was when my wife got a job. My wife, who I've known now for quite a long time, she got her first job as a graduate in procurement, working for Railtrack. So that was the first ever time I'd ever experienced it. And she left after a year and a half because it was all about policy procedure, and she wasn't overly happy with the culture. So my initial input into the world of procurement was an interesting one, you could say. It's funny how perceptions are put onto you from other things. So yeah, I've worked across I suppose many sort of staffing, managed service provision, which is sort of a category of workforce management, but also provided and delivered SaaS technology solutions across both procurement and workforce industries. And as of today, I now have my own business, which I run from a consultant perspective, but I also work for a company called Scopal. So Scopal is a venture studio that basically builds and invests in procurement and workforce technology.
Okay. So I get these words like MSP, workforce, and SaaS. So we'll focus on that. But you covered like how you reached procurement. And you did a lot of other roles as well. So which roles did you like in particular? Anything that you like in your career more than something else?
Yeah, no, that's good. Like, I think what would be quite interesting is because I think it's interesting to know a little bit of history about where I came from. Like, I grew up in a very, very sort of sport-heavy family. So from the age of 5, I was a swimmer. I swam at sort of regional and national level. Never won any medals, but my mum was a swimming coach. So I pretty much spent 90% of my time training, competing, doing all those wonderful things. So I suppose before I get onto where procurement is, I think my work ethic was always built around sports. So, you know, when you look sort of commitment, teamwork, discipline, all those sort of foundations of soft skills were sort of learned from a young age without me really knowing it. Academically, I wasn't the greatest. I got through school. Sport was always my greatest passion when I was younger. But then when I moved into my professional career, I started off into banking, finance, and then ultimately moved into recruitment. I didn't follow a career in sport mainly because I had many injuries that prevented me from doing them when I was younger. So I sort of started focusing on that, but the reason I went into that area was more around the people side, the soft skills side. I really enjoyed engagement with people, and in fact, they're things that I still do today, which is why I'm mentioning it from a relevance perspective. I think my first real exposure to procurement, if I'm picking out sort of a bit of a journey, was when I moved to Beeline in 2003. So wife went to study teaching. I found a job in London working for a company called Beeline, basically running a vendor management software program with an MSP bolt-on. Now that role was focused on very much, you know, assisting the client sourcing, filling roles, and then ultimately managing the supplier relations side of it. So I suppose that's where I got my first sort of feel of it, but obviously didn't even realize that, you know, that might be related to procurement soft skills or function in a way. So yeah, so I think that's where it came from. And then throughout my roles at Beeline, so I've never worked for a large corporate organization. The business size I've worked for is up to like 600 people. So every business I've worked in has never had a procurement function that you might see in a larger corporate or even, you know, mid-sized organization. So very much what I had to do in my role throughout the years was actually evolving to take on a number of skill sets, which actually were very, very procurement focused. And I find it really interesting because there are so many roles, you know, within my industry, within workforce, that correlate directly to procurement skill sets. So, you know, I moved up to management role, so helping with leadership and developing the teams. Then I started managing the negotiation of our supply chains. So, you know, they were provided to our service. So I was technically acting as procurement from that perspective. Then moved on to managing contracts, larger contracts with clients. So rather than the smaller supply agreements, the larger contracts. And then I was lucky enough, because I stayed there 20 years, I sort of ended up on the global leadership team, and I was very much involved in sort of the M&A and procuring additional businesses to fit in with Beeline. So I've been quite lucky to see a lot of elements of procurement, but I think I only really realised, mainly because my old boss used to be head of procurement at a Deco Group, I only really realised like 5-10 years ago that hold on a minute here, this role is very different to what you thought it was, and actually the skill sets that you're doing are actually very much embedded in what a procurement team would do. And it helped me change my focus and my mindset a little bit. So I suppose, yeah, I've had touch points all over the place when it comes to procurement.
So interesting point there, that a lot of large companies have organized procurement teams, which is good. But there are also small companies with, you know, minimum procurement knowledge or minimum structure in that sense for procurement, which does a lot of good things as well. So have you seen those kind of things in your previous roles? Like how does the small companies do procurement, which is, you know, in its own way good as well?
Yeah, definitely. So I've sort of empowered and embodied that role myself throughout the years. So you know, I suppose it's sort of trying to simplify. So the way I look at it, and maybe this is because of my background, I don't look at it as procurement as a function, right? I don't look at it as a department. I look at it as a set of skills that are required to complete a numerous amount of tasks. Now, obviously, there is a lot of process, things with ESG, things like I would never know. My procurement experience is more around buying, purchasing, supply management, that side of things. So the way we approached it really was to sort of look at, you know, the general tasks that we needed and work out who's got the best skill set to manage those type of things. And that was very much how, when I speak to, because I work a lot with startups, and a lot of the gaps, a lot of the startups I speak with is actually they struggle when it comes to you know, actually understanding how a procurement function should work. Not that they need a procurement function, but the core roles of it. So it is really interesting. And actually, the ones that I've been working with over the last year that have got a great plan, they've got a great idea of what value they want to give. Funnily enough, they've got touch points with procurement throughout their career. And the ones where we've had to come in and help them a bit more is maybe where they built a business that literally do not, you know, they come from a technical background. They've never really evolved their, I suppose, soft skill side of things, and they've stalled. So I think it's completely integral, to be honest with you, to any business. And that's why I say I try to treat procurement as a skill set rather than just a function, because not every business has the budget for a procurement function.
Right. Thank you. I think you mentioned that you have done a lot of workforce category management, and you've done a procurement of the workforce. How do you see workforce as different from other categories?
Yeah, it's not inherently different, but there are some key differences. I think the focus is on the fact that the word workforce means people. People are the foundation of every business. They're across. It doesn't matter what department, what team. There's people behind it, regardless of what AI is looking to do right now. So every service, every product is brought in. So I think what that does is it adds quite a bit of complexity to how businesses manage the category of workforce, right? And I'm only talking about external workforce. I'm not talking about permanent employees because, obviously traditionally they're handled by human resources. So yeah, that for me instantly adds complexity, right? Because you then got this category of supply where all departments are potentially using it, maybe different volumes depending on their needs, and they may all have some of their own process to manage it. They may have different supply chains to manage it. They may already have service agreements in place where a category manager has gone, I'm dealing with a manufacturing company who are providing goods, but actually that manufacturing company is providing staff and people from an external perspective to actually help. So it can become very fragmented. It can be very decentralized. And it means that, visibility on spend, visibility on things like compliance and risk becomes a massive challenge. So that definitely is inherently one of the things. I think one of the important things that people do overlook is the fact that because it is cross-functional, so cross-functional collaboration, although workforce could be managed as a category, and a lot of businesses do manage it as a category, you still need a lot of touch points from others to be able to successfully get it. Versus, again, I'll use the example of a manufacturing company, where you shipping in raw materials. That's very bespoke and specific to that area. Yes, it may touch other areas, but it's under full control. Whereas the management of this type of function covers a lot more. And it's a different type of approach because it's more like an overlapping layer category to other services. So all of the categories that are provided within a procurement category management list is they're supported by this category, right? Not one. If someone can turn around and say that not one person is brought in externally to support a category, then I'd love to have a chat with them about it because it's very common. So yeah, I think that's how I would define the differences to other categories.
And obviously, workforce is one of the most important things as a category because if you see services, everything translates to labor or workforce, although we see it in different ways. So, for example, marketing is also workforce in some certain ways, but we tend to downsize a little bit. I mean, not everybody is focused on workforce as a company. And do you think this needs to change? Do you need approach has to be there for workforce management in any company regarding procurement?
Oh, most definitely. There needs to be some eyes on it because what I'm seeing and shifting is a lot of obviously we've seen a lot of businesses cut down on headcount, on permanent headcount, and then when business starts to ramp up again, they suddenly have a need to bring external workforce in because they don't want to build that budget again on permanent headcount. There was a reason for doing that. So minimum 20%, some businesses 60-70%. You've got a large external workforce in place that also needs to be managed correctly across lots of different projects and deliverables. So there's, I think, I won't mention the name of the company, but they're a large multinational cigarette provider, and they've actually structured their own internal workforce category management that is owned by HR, but they put in place the process of procurement, but embed it within HR. So although it's not technically procurement, it is procurement. It just sits under HR. And I suppose that reflects back to what I was saying about the skill sets. I don't believe that just these skill sets need to sit here. A lot of departments need to sort of cover those type of skill sets. So yeah, the risks at the moment that are being seen around IR35 worker classification in any country, It's one of those unknowns, and a lot of people don't seem to care about stuff like that until they get a fine on their desk and suddenly it hits, and then they've got to solve the problem. Now, how are you going to do that without having good visibility over your external workforce? Whether you just get a report on the spend or actually you bring in an external provider, whatever, without that type of capability, your business is potentially putting itself at risk.
Right. Yes. I would go on to that point that you said. Right. Most of the workforce is actually either delegated to HR or it sits under HR, because it makes sense for them because HR does the internal recruitment. So they just think that they can just carry on with the external as well. But I think you touched about that part. That there is a lot of contracts that procurement does. If you would expand on that a little bit more, like what kind of risk we are talking about and how contracts can actually mitigate those risks when we are talking about workforce.
Yeah, definitely. So let's just say you've engaged a service provider to run a transformation project, right? They're going to bring their own staff in, so they're going to bring their team in. They're technically classed as external, but they may independently contract those people. So one of the risks is you look at the chain of command, right? So procurement, wholeheartedly, they will work with the buyers to agree an overarching contract, scope out the work, agree a statement of work, and agree that contract with those elements in. That's great. You back that off to the supplier, but then how do you know that the contract that is backed off to the actual workers that are brought in independently mirrors what the client wanted? For example, set deliverables, set time to complete, and all those sort of things. So then what happens is you've then suddenly got this risk, right? You're then asked by HMRC or whichever tax body, well, I know that you've had these people working in under the service. You need to categorically tell me that these people are either in or out policy from a tax exemption perspective. So that alone is one tiny little risk of what things could be. In other countries, if you're classifying the type of employment differently, you can be subject to a number of fines, and also the way that you treat workers, as in they're not permanent employees. There's also a risk of not managing them correctly, as in you shouldn't really be managing. They've got a set of tasks to do. They need to do it. You shouldn't be doing appraisals with them and things like that. So there's quite a few risks around that area, which I think is bigger. Right. The more sort of hard risks, are things around, the standardization of contracts, right? You've got a supply chain. If you're not managing your workforce effectively, you could have a large number of suppliers that are working on different rates, different SLAs, different setups. There's no visibility, right? That's a huge exposure to not maybe getting the value you need, but also the cost efficiency you need across your business as well. So that's also why I think it's very, very important. There's quite a few more examples we can go into, but I think you get the general idea. I think procurement as a role can add great value to how workforce is engaged by working with HR and direct buyers who category managers even from the procurement team, to make sure there's some consistency and an overarching approach to it, because that's where a lot of things fall down. You have HR managing external workforce, but it will be maybe to cover a maternity leave or to cover someone else, and then you have buyers who are working with procurement who are bringing in services. There's two different processes here that don't seem to match. So how's that going to work out for you? You need to make sure there's some sort of process to govern.
Right. Think about the social and the governance part from ESG regarding workforce.
Again, didn't quite get the full question, Supratim, sorry, but I sort of gathered you wanted to know a little bit about from a sort of governance perspective and social perspective, how workforce impacts a business. Is that right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. Well, I suppose from a governance perspective, having external workers that don't necessarily have working your reporting lines and and actually focus on a shared vision of goal maybe of that department can necessarily cause challenges. I suppose it really depends on what you're trying to achieve and how you set the boundaries out of the impact of those. But I think it all, there's still elements that buyers and service managers or whoever's bringing in these external employees, you can still embed your vision and you can still embed your culture on those people coming in. All you're doing is you're not physically managing them, but you can still embrace them into that. So if that's done correctly, because all this rolls back to people and how people are managed at the end of the day and how people are led, I think you can have a better experience around controlling the governance side of things. And what was the second part of the question again? Sorry, it was about
the social part.
The social part. Explain to me what you mean by social, because I can dive into several areas on that.
So let's say diversity or even child labor or anything else, right? You're not engaging something that you should not be engaging with.
Oh yeah, correct. So if you're managing your external workforce correctly, then let's say you've brought in a managed service provider and you're using technology. The way that these businesses work is they have very strict understanding during the scope of implementation to work out, well, what are your DE&I requirements, right? We need to make sure we follow in with policy, because that is one of the compliance risks that are there too, right? So if the business that is working and with an MSP or technology has specific needs, they tend to get configured as a requirement, so that a lot of that compliance thing is shut out, versus not having a technology, trying to manage things via HR. You've got no standardized process, no standard approach to bringing external workforce. You've got no one checking their validation that documents have been checked, and to your point, there's no child labor going on. There's passports collected. You have no control over that. So if you do hire on a large scale.
So I was going to come to that MSP part. You touched on that. Tell us about you need MSP for companies, and especially how can procurement benefit from MSP?
Oh yeah, definitely. So the reason why businesses bring in managed service providers to manage that category of workforce, but let's just say that MSPs never operate without technology nowadays. It's just one goes with the other, and it has done for many years, but they're much more reliant now on utilizing technology to improve. So ultimately, by doing that, they're going to get more visibility and control. So centralized data from a workforce spend perspective, from a compliance perspective, that tends to be key one. Key two is process efficiency. So, it's been able to take multiple different workflows, still have multiple different workflows, but have them in a single system that makes it easier for their businesses to hire. So instantly, those two things alone would say to procurement, hold on a minute here. So, a lot of my business are telling me we're wasting time on hiring and recruiting. We have no visibility on who's in the business. We need to find a solution for them. A managed service provider with technology wraparound is always a good thing. I mentioned this one earlier. Probably one of the biggest benefits, which was seen more so back in the early days, was cost optimization. As I mentioned, right. If you've got a supply chain, this is no different to other categories, right? This is where there is a similarity, right? You've got a supply chain of a huge volume of suppliers. They're just providing a different type of service. The only challenge is you've got differing SLAs, you've got differing sort of header terms with those suppliers. You've also got differing engagement rates within those suppliers. So those alone are just very easy quick wins to get through. Now, obviously, they need to be managed by change management, because you might be asking to negotiate. But that's something we can talk about. We've already mentioned the risk and compliance benefits. That is again something, and then workforce planning. So this isn't necessarily HR, but when you've got a lot of buyers interacting with procurement, they're needing more information on, well, if I'm going to bring a project in, how am I going to manage that against the resource that I'm going to bring in? I need information to help me understand if I've got a project for these raw materials that I'm bringing in. How am I going to get the staff? Have we got the supply chain to get the staff and things like that? So if I'm looking at the top benefits that you might initially bring one in for, those are the things. Now, second wave, MSPs start to look at things like improving how the category is, right? Maybe they can shape up the category more. Maybe they've seen trends in your hiring patterns and your project patterns that means a different function of a vendor management software might aid them more. For example, a company might have traditionally just hired people via a standard recruitment process, but then suddenly they've started to evolve into more services. So they're bringing in a service provider with the staff behind to support it. Well, a standard VMS wouldn't fit that need. You're going to need to shift your technology slightly. So I think managed service provider has a lot of value, but it's obviously all down. There's obviously a lot of managed service providers down there, but it's obviously down to how they interact and sort of manage that contract. So yeah, there's quite a few things, and they're not specific to industry. At the end of the day, MSPs are out there from an ROI perspective, and they're gonna focus on enterprise level clients because they're going to bring a lot of the revenue in. The challenge is that a lot of those enterprise clients have been maybe through 2, 3, 4 waves of MSP contracts, so the margins tend to get quite low and quite tight. So what's happening now is that we're actually seeing procurement see value in more mid-sized vendor management softwares, but not even vendor management softwares. There's softwares out there that just provide services. There's softwares out there that provide better portals for independent contractors versus going for an MSP. So the spider web, if we like to call it the spider web of those things, is huge. The volume of different types of solutions you can get. So you do need someone in procurement, if workforce is an area that you want to focus on, to really do their due diligence and really understand the need of the business. And I would always start on those sort of 5 categories to try and wean out where they go. I also do consulting to clients and have them throughout my career, where I go in and help them define those type of things. And what happens more often than not is that in the past, it has been looked at, right, let's optimize costs. We need to reduce costs to show value in what we're doing. Well, yeah, you've done that. Now what do you do? Right. Well, maybe you can add on these other things that I've mentioned. So I think that's really what it is. And the vendor management software then obviously adds an additional layer. So all those things I mentioned, it supports those things. But what it bringing in, I use the term vendor management software as a broad term. As I mentioned, vendor management software is one type of technology that you can use to source external workers. But it's not the only way of doing it. That is another podcast explaining the technical web of all of the workforce technologies. But automation, efficiency, making data-driven decisions, integrating with your ERPs to make sure that all your data flows correctly, and improving the user experience, being able to scale what you're doing for your workforce, but then ultimately utilize the technology to maybe bring more strategy and change to it. So there's a huge amount of requirements that are needed.
Right. I think one of the most interesting part is if you apply, let's say, Pareto, and you see MSP, you can actually focus your entire energy on the strategy vendors, and you can, give out your non-strategic or the tail to the MSP. That is one way of doing things also. So I think,
yeah, definitely. It's been a common way of doing things. Sorry for that. It's like the 80-20 is always a way to go. But the challenge is that that 20% are still given the freedom to do what they wanted to do in the ways they used to do it. That 80% are probably a little bit more frustrated because they've now got guardrails around them and they're having to follow a process, and obviously a large percentage of them are going to be happy, but there's going to be a small percentage of them that are like, well, hold on a minute, this isn't working for me. And then what you tend to see happen is you tend to see that 20% grow, and that maverick rogue spend, or whatever you want to classify it as, start to grow. And it's quite a good point, to be honest with you, because that's where we are with the industry a little bit at the moment, is that the MSPs are now starting to shift their focus a little bit more on the spend, not under management, because obviously they want to get ROI out of things. So there are a lot more technical solutions, and some of the MSPs are really changing the way they're working to try and tackle. Some of them are already doing it, but it's not common across all MSPs.
Right. And when I started off, procurement was, relatively something that was looked at that, okay, now you guys want to do it, what I was doing so long. There are places that is still there, like we talked about workforce and HR delegation and all. Do you think MSP is in that stage right now? Procurement consultancy was at that stage one point of time. Do you think MSP is at that stage? And, do you think that in the future MSP would grow and every company might use it more often than it is right now?
Yeah, I don't want to diminish my many colleagues that I have in the MSP world, but I think you need to be at a certain level to engage with an MSP, right? Because there's different sort of layers of the onion when it comes to the type of service an MSP will provide. But when you're getting to sort of a more mid-size approach, it's not such a dedicated team, such a dedicated strategy, because the MSP aren't going to get the same ROI back out of the deal, so they need to look at better ways to better manage mid-sized business contracts. But a trend, to be honest with you, that I tend to see is that when you're looking at, when I say mid-size, let's say up to 50 mil in spend going through, these businesses are now starting to actually take tech themselves versus going to an external MSP. They might bring in an MSP to maybe manage some of the basics, but actually their headcount doesn't really account for bringing all of that in. So is it more cost effective for them just to bring a technology in and then ascertain? There's also been a massive trend that continues to happen, where some of these larger corporates that have had managed service provision for many years, as long as I was in the industry, they've gone through several cycles, and they now know what they want, right? They know that they can run this service. They can run it as a joint venture between procurement and HR, or a separate entity within their business, and they're setting up their own internal programs. Yes, there is some cost associated to that, but actually it means they can take back more control, and they, I suppose, have a little bit more appreciation for how things are managed. Alex has just put one on there about why our company is internalizing. It's a really interesting point. So I think it comes down to ultimately a lot of the skill sets that they have internally, and I suppose the vision of what they're trying to achieve. Because of the different varying ways of engaging staff now, right? So you've got your traditional staffing recruitment process, right? You run those through the managed service provider. But then you've also got a services program where, as I mentioned earlier, external workforce are brought in via services, and the MSP doesn't necessarily or may not have the capabilities to manage that. Also, the technology used, they might not manage that type of thing. You've also then got what we call direct sourcing. So, and when I say direct sourcing, I'm more about, there might be a number of departments that have a talent pool of people where they're like, look, we don't need a managed service. We've got a good pool of people that we engage. We just need a better system and a better process to manage it. So you've got all of these varying different ways of bringing in staff. Businesses suddenly look at it and go, well, hold on a minute here. I've now got an MSP doing this. I'm managing this internally. This isn't being managed. I've just got a tech for this piece. We need to do something about it. So I strongly believe it tends, and as I say, it's still an evolving approach that's happening around that. But that tends to be a scenario. It doesn't tend to fill back to sort of cost savings and things, because the fact is, yes, you're not paying for an MSP service anymore, but you're paying for internal staff to manage it. But because of the advancements in technology over the last 2-3 years, a lot of those tasks that a managed service provider might have been doing are actually automated. And actually, is there a need for a managed service provider to vet our candidates? Depending on your work culture, yes, you need it. Some of them may turn around and go, you know what, our hiring community and our buyers know exactly what they're doing.
Things can procurement do to do things better?
Well, I think the challenge that procurement face when it comes to workforce technology is just the myriad and volume of providers that are out there who offer similar services, but actually when you look into the weeds a bit, they may not be the provider of choice. So I think the challenge is that there's not an easy way to really fully understand the market unless you've been in the industry for many years. It's like, if you wanted me to talk to you about ESG, I'd have to go off and do a whole ton of research, right? And come back to you and go, right, now I know what I'm talking about. Now I understand what it is. So I think that's challenge. That's ultimately the first challenge. I think, the second challenge is that, you would have engaged a certain technology for a period of time, but then suddenly your business has changed and shifted. And that technology doesn't meet the needs of what you actually do, what you need from your workforce, from your external workforce. So I think that also causes a big challenge, because that's quite a big change, right? If you're changing how all of your external resources managed, yes, it might just be flipping in a technology, but actually that's a massive project. You've got just the user adoption, you've got the integration side of things, you've got the supply chain that you've got to look at. So making the right decision and really understanding your business's strategy about what you're trying to achieve with workforce management for the next sort of 3 to 5 years. And I know it's difficult because business change, but it's probably more important than a number of different categories, because it's not like, it's not to do with the products that you're selling as your business. It's more to do with how you're running your business to support the sale of those products. And so yeah, I think that's definitely one of the bigger challenges.
Right. So when we are talking about implementation or something, you mentioned one point that we have to see as to what your business is, or what your real objective is. What other factors should somebody consider when they're, let's say, choosing or implementing something?
Yeah, I think I briefly went through some of these before, but I think there's some key categories that you need to look at. You need to look at the process, right? That's a simple one. The efficiency around the process, and understand from your hiring community and buyers, what the pitfalls are and what the challenges are. One of the things is also around data-driven decision making, right? A lot of the reason why procurement should look at technology for these things is speaking across departments, the HRO, CIO, CFO, all of those areas that actually need to touch and look at that data and understand that data. And actually they can't make decisions because they don't have full visibility. So I think that's one of the important factors to look at when you're thinking about implementing or purchasing software or managed service provider. I think a lot of it is down to company culture, right? Because you might already have multiple technologies that are being used, right? You might be putting your business through ultimately a number of change programs. So I suppose it's weighing up the priority of where workforce sits among your other categories and what really is possible. Because it can be, for a mid-sized business, it's not as much of a change. And actually there are some technologies deploying now which are very simple, deployed within 2 to 4 weeks for a mid-sized business. But when you're enterprise level, you're looking minimum 6 to 9 months to properly implement a brand new software, because of all the interconnections and all the process and all the change you need to look at. And then security and compliance is massive, right? But that should be across any category in procurement, in IT. If you've got someone procuring IT in your business, you're going to have to get your suppliers to conform to those specific things.
Right. Now, the reason I keep asking this question is because it is pretty hard for procurement to sell itself in terms of when it needs certain things, right? So whether, when we talk about, let's say, data, if we say to our management that we need clean data, it is pretty hard for procurement to sell it, right? Mm-hmm. So same way, software is something that we don't tend to get easily manpower as well. So that's the reason I was asking for this benefits, that what should procurement say to the management that we can get a better software, let's say?
Well, yeah, I think if I go back to those sort of I suppose where the category is different, you're looking at the complexity of how difficult it is to hire staff. Are they happy with their supply chain? And do they have a structured supply chain already that is providing value? And has that supply chain been vetted against? So I don't know whether the question is for procurement to be able to go to departments and go, hey, look at the value of what this technology can provide. I think it's procurement being able to articulate and go to other departments and people that are bringing in external workforce services to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And yes, it is a little bit labor intensive, but I've always said, and there's technology out there now, that before you even start looking at process and how things are being managed, the one question that procurement should always ask is, do you have a comprehensive understanding of all of the external workforce spend within your department, within your section, team, business, whatever it would be? Very, very simple question. If the answer is no, then you then suddenly got a fair few follow-up questions to say, okay, so what do you do about supplier standardization? What do you do about benchmarking the rates that we're getting in? What are you doing? Why are you bringing in staff via service agreements, or are you bringing them in via staffing agencies? So it sort of provides this feed down. So I'd like, if anyone wants to talk about it, but I've got a whole load of checklists that I've used over the years to help, I suppose, understand and intermingle with procurement of how they work with their departments to get data. Because sometimes in my life, when we've implemented solutions, procurement and HR said, look, we want you to go in and do that. So as a consultant, you have to go in and do all of that piece of work to understand it. And I guarantee you, very quickly you'll be able to identify, for those things I mentioned earlier, any potential value that can be brought, right? Any additional value that could be brought. And I'm not just talking about cost savings, I'm talking about the myriad of things that procurement do, compliance risk, all of those fun things as well.
Right. Yeah. And again, procurement, whenever we talk about what we bring on the table, it is always starts from savings or cost reduction. But we do a lot of risk mitigation. We do a lot of other things, and I think those are fair points as well. I'm going back to where we started off. You started off by saying that there are certain skills that procurement needs, right? As a career for procurement, you need certain skills. If you would like to expand on that, what kind of skills are we talking about? As a fresher, if somebody is listening to this.
Yeah, definitely. So if you've got, if there's someone who's, I don't know, maybe recently qualified or just come into procurement. So and I do go back to it, right? That I wish that, this might stem into some other questions you have later, but I sort of wish that procurement wasn't classed as a function and it was more classed as a set of skills, right? Because as a graduate, you've been through multiple training, understanding how a procurement team operates, all of these different policies, but then suddenly you're thrown in a seat, right? And you're like, right, well, how do I implement these things, right? So yes, soft skills is trained during the SIP's journey and other people's journeys, but I don't think it's probably heightened enough. I think soft skills, before I go into them, soft skills should be put in front of sort of hard process. I suppose, that type of approach. So I think things like stakeholder engagement, right? Knowing how to manage and communicate effectively with stakeholders is probably the most key thing that you need in any role in the business, technically, where you're trying to bring value. Very, very basic one, but you must do it. Things like critical thinking, right? Being able to be adaptable. So I think without being able to think through a solution, ask the right questions to get the right output. Again, you can read as many manuals and as many process documents, but if you don't know how to articulate that in a business, I think you're struggling. One of the things I've learned over the years is that I'm actually a relatively good negotiator without actually being fully trained in it. But but that comes with experience, right? So you need to buddy up with people in your team and find those mentors, find those people that you follow. LinkedIn, Alchemy Network, great sources where you can get information from and find someone in your network to start sharing experiences. You can't sit on your own not being proactive around your soft skills. I think if you do that, you're gonna fail. And probably the biggest one that I've learned over the years, and a lot of my team, I wish I trained them on when I didn't know too much about it, was commercial awareness. Right? It's such a big gap in people's skill sets, because they're like, no, this is how we procure, this is how we manage this process. It's like, well, no, you need to take a step back and actually think a little bit deeper around why we're doing things and what we're doing things for. So, if you don't understand how business decisions impact the bottom line, then you shouldn't really be making those decisions going forward. So I think it's all stuff, work experience, right? You need to get in, you need to get work. But probably what's more important is making sure that if you're a graduate going into a new business, that you really understand the culture and how the leadership team foster, your progression within the business. Because without that, and with going into a culture that you're not sure about what the culture is, that's probably the bigger risk, because you're not going to be able to get access to doing those things.
Right. I see Alex has added some points here. He says everything starts with data. He says communication is the key to success. And he also says creativity and the 5 whys. So all these, combination with the soft skills, and that enhances the chance of success. So I think this would definitely help if any fresher or anybody who is starting off.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't think anybody feels stagnant. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I think all I was just going to end that with was everyone can learn a process, right? I learned new industries throughout my career, but what I can't do, and the reason why I mentioned all that stuff at the start about where I came from and what I built, and all of that stuff, it takes time to be consistent about those things. And I'm not saying I'm the best at it, because I'm definitely not, but I've spent time, cultivating that skill set. So I feel that it can be adaptable to different businesses that I go into.
You've seen tech. Where are we going with AI?
Yeah, there isn't a day, I can't remember the last day where I didn't actually have a discussion about technology or AI. And I actually talked about just people for the day. When was the last time we ever did that? Where's AI going? Well, it's already here. Where is it going? The main thing is that AI is just not, and they'll keep banging it on and people keep saying it, but AI is not going to replace people, right? AI is a great tool, right? It has a great role going forward in general procurement and workforce procurement. There's a lot of things that are already happening around agentic AI to help improve how businesses are sourcing, they're benchmarking, they're providing strategic forecasting and analyzing. Well, all of that is on the way. But the fact of it is, it will never replace soft skills, right? It will never replace that soft skills. When someone at a business says to me, yeah, I've got my workforce, but actually my best negotiator in my business is AI, I'm probably gonna retire and go, right, I've had enough. This industry is not for me anymore, because AI for me, there's certain elements to it. We all now, the reason I'm not swerving the discussion, it's just that there is so much talk and so much content around it. The fact is, agentic AI is really developing to take the lead, but there's a lot of talk about it, but there's not many, like the businesses I've worked with. So I work with technology providers who are looking for investment and building business, right? One specific company is using agentic AI extremely well, and they've shown me how they're using it, what the value is going to be, and how it's going to change the client they work with. Great. But outside of that, when I speak to businesses, I don't really get a sense of what that means for them at the moment. So it's still a very open question, and there's a few people I can suggest if helpful to follow on other platforms that pretty much are so integrated within where AI is going. But actually, at the moment, AI development and all these businesses are actually going to be losing money in the next sort of 12 to 24 months because they're still putting so much money into it and developing it. And actually the cost models for it don't seem to be working out. I think a guy called Theo Priestley, I think that's the name, the one that I really like following. He's a really good guy to do. Big thing for me is, look, forget about technology, forget about what AI is going to do. What is your need as a business? What do you need to provide better value to what you're doing? When you know what that is, great, go do your research on those providers that are adding value that you think might work, and then find the right one. Don't overcomplicate it, you know. But as I mentioned before, right, there's so many providers out there from a technology perspective that it's a bit of a dark cloud. But hey, that's something that I can help with if anyone needs it.
This one video where AI was taking interviews of humans, and then, you know, I was just thinking that what if the human is replaced by AI again? So AI is interviewing an AI, and then the job is going to AI, and then I think, you know, you can just expand on it and just go, you know, to something crazy levels. Who is getting paid and what are we doing?
Yeah, I don't think it's controversial. I think it's you know, it's discussions that a lot of people don't really bring up to the world. Have you ever seen the film Minority Report? I think it had Tom Cruise in it.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
right.
Yes.
So it's like when we get to those days where, you know, your government is being run by AI and AI is hiring AI. Yeah, you know, the fact is, I think we can go so far with it, but I really hope that the people who are developing these things are being smart and not just trying to not just trying to do it from a financial perspective. And I know they're not, right. It's all fantastic stuff, but I think us, in our human nature, we need to continue, you know, utilizing AI software, whatever you want to phrase it, to augment what you do, and for you to be able to spend more time developing and utilizing your soft skills to not lose that, you know, that sort of feeling that you need when you work, right? If you're just there, it's like kids I see today, and I'm waffling on a little bit here, but, you know, there's some kids who are on devices all day long. Oh, need this, press this button. No communication, you know, and it's just like, we can't let it get to that point where all of our generation suddenly loses their social skills, and then suddenly we start to lose people, you know, the new people coming through, which isn't the case obviously right now, but, you know, my 8-year-old who's coming through in 10, 15 years time, he hasn't got a clue of what strategic decision making is, because we use AI to do that. So why would I bother? You know, so hopefully we'll never get there.
Yeah. But yeah, it's almost an hour. I think there's no further question in the chat. Any closing things, anything that you want to mention? We talked about a lot about workforce, MSPs, softwares, procure tech, AI. Anything for freshers or?
Yeah, I suppose my closing remarks is, and, you know, again, I want to reflect back. Yeah, I've never had a job title that's in procurement, but that doesn't matter. You know, my job has embodied procurement throughout my life, and a lot more people need to realise that. And I know there's a lot of stuff going on at the moment around changing the perception of procurement and a few things. And I think, you know, my closing remarks are, is I just really want. I just feel by classing it as a function, you almost pigeonholing procurement into a separate division. And I know people want to improve, but all departments want to improve within a business and how they work. So just focus on the value, right? And when someone says, my whole approach is, instead of someone turning around and saying, oh, you go to procurement for that, they should be saying, oh, you go to Alex for that. And it should be more about the value that a person provides versus just the value that a department provides. So I think the more emphasis on soft skills that can be done, the better things will be.
Right. Yes. And I think that's the message that should go to the future of procurement as well. You know, the titles don't matter. What you bring on the table, what values you are bringing, is more important than anything else. And I would be happy to see that as a future of procurement rather than anything else. So
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, what we don't want is fighting between departments. Well, procurement's great, HR's not so good. It's like, no. Let's just be a bit more collaborative. Let's all embrace these skill sets because they're very transferable. But then that's down a lot to company culture, which is a bigger challenge to solve. Anyone who I'm not connected with, please feel free to reach out. Happy to discuss.
Thank you so much, Alex, for your time. It was great discussing with you. Sorry for the hiccups with the internet, but I think it's a fair discussion, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope the audience enjoyed it. Thank you all for listening, and have a nice day then. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening.